This is the October Quilts First. We are live from Michigan.
From Michigan. We're not in Chicago today.
Because outside our studio for the last 6 months has been very loud road construction.
The good news is we have a nicely paved road.
But it starts sometimes at 5:30 in the morning, and invariably there's jackhammers going. So there's been a lot of construction that has interfered with our Quilts First schedule. So we decided we'll just come to Michigan.
They promised it would all be done last week, but you know how that goes.
Yeah. So
we're kind of in our makeshift. Not makeshift, but we're in our...
It's kind of makeshift.
Yeah.
It's our studio.
So one of the things, we don't have our usual setup, so if we're scrolling around to see who's there or how that's all going...
And we do not have 300 bolts of fabric that we can go and run and get. Let us know. I have a bunch of questions that were left from previous posts that can get us started in the conversation. We can jump into those, but feel free to leave your questions and comments and we'll get to as many as we can. But at least for now, we're in rural Michigan where the road isn't even paved. So we know that it's not going to be repaved today.
Yes, there's no paved road where we are.
That's right.
So anyway, let's get to quilts.
Yes.
It's great to be with you, and we have a couple questions to start out. So do you want to begin?
Well, I think the first topic I wanted to talk about was the Modern Meets Modern exhibit at the International Quilt Museum. And it looks like a really fabulous show. So if you can't get there in person, look at the International Quilt Museum's website. You'll be able to see the show virtually.
And I actually would like to jump in and say some people don't know about the International Quilt Museum, and I believe it's the world's largest public collection of quilts. It's housed by the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. And maybe a decade ago, they had a big fundraiser. They built a gazillion-dollar new museum, kind of star architect. It's not, I love little local quilt museums. This is a museum where the research, the academics, and the display is really deep and though and kind of world class. It's a world class museum.
It is for quilting for sure. So we have there are 2 of our quilts in their collection, and the one that's in this show is our outside the box quilt, and we put outside the box up for auction on eBay in 2020 to raise money for the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which supports historically Black colleges and universities and scholarships for underrepresented, for predominantly Black students. So Linda Pumphrey bought that quilt and donated it to the International Quilt Museum.
She's a board member.
Yeah, and so that quilt is appearing in the show.
And it was actually fun for us. It was a nice honor. Not only did they acquire the quilt through this acquisition, but last year they featured it as their holiday card for...
You're right.
They had no cards made,
and
it was the holiday card that the museum sent out.
But the show itself is really interesting in that it has a number of modern quilts and it has a number of vintage quilts that were considered modern at the time of their making, and it engages the entire question of when is something modern and what makes it modern. And we did a little video clip talking about our approach to modern quilting and what makes it modern and why what we were trying to do when we made that quilt. And that quilt was that 1999, 2000?
I think
It's, like 20 years ago or so. So, sorry, there are constant interruptions. I know we have decent Wi-Fi here where we are, so I'm hoping it will.
And one of
it's
the
always
things,
frustrating.
Yeah, I am. Facebook often has little glitches with Facebook Live, so we're also simultaneously recording this so that when we get back, it may not be today, it may be in a day or so, I can edit this and put it up on our YouTube channel.
Is it on though? Because I'm not seeing the light.
Let me just double check.
Yes, double check, because I'm not seeing the light
be.
on. At any rate, so one of the things that that I wanted to quickly say about the Modern Meets Modern quilt exhibit, and that leads into a question that our friend Lorraine in Australia asked, was about, do we see Bauhaus influences in modern quilting? And we could spend the entire we could spend the entire hour talking about influences in modern quilting, and the kind of the short abbreviated answer, because we have other questions to get to, and you jump in and correct me if you have a different opinion, but
Wait, can I just jump in before we get going?
Yeah.
The question was the influence of the Bauhaus, and because this is a question that not everyone will immediately know, do you want to just quickly explain Bauhaus?
No, you started to explain it.
So
feel free to explain it.
The Bauhaus was an art and design school in Germany.
But you got to do it. You got to.
Yes. So we're talking a little, 100 years ago, roughly.
Yeah, exactly 20 years ago.
And it was a school that kind of birthed a lot of modern design and architecture, and looked at kind of a new methodology, and it was kind of an I want to talk too much, so she'll be more succinct.
To me, what I got out of the Bauhaus movement is that it was a response. It was in some ways a continuation of the arts and crafts movement that valued the hand and handmade things, but it was also a movement that took that a little bit farther and said, we don't want to have only soulless manufactured things in our lives, but there is a place for technology in craft, and that there's no need to suggest that things made with machines by artisans are are less than things made with hand tools, or that they're also not less than the fine arts, that that craft should be elevated to the same respect that painting and sculpture and such
or
are.
Even almost the opposite in some ways, that it was not that it should be elevated, but it was kind of anti-elitist, that the art shouldn't necessarily be the elevated form, that is all important.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
really
the strange thing about the Bauhaus is it became such a recognizable international minimalist style that now when people think about the Bauhaus, they think about minimalism.
And it's not all minimalism.
It was actually much more of a conceptual movement. And now I think that a lot of quilters and designers mimic the style, and it's become a style that gets copied. So you see a lot of.
I want to structure what you're saying a little bit, because what I had started to say was that over the last 20 years, what Bill and I have seen is that among modern quilters, there tends to be two groups of people. There are people who are interested in kind of the ideas and the history and the thinking behind movements like Bauhaus and modernism and that kind of thing, and they're designing quilts thinking about how to broaden how you can express through quilting ideas of modernism and that sort of thing. And then there are other people who we refer to as style chasers, who don't understand or not interested in the ideas behind the quilts, but they're just like, oh, bright colors, asymmetry,
Or
negative space.
geometric forms.
Yeah, and that they're mimicking what other people are developing, but they don't have an interest. So then in kind of understanding the larger picture, and so then they have like the laundry list of, describing what it looks like, but not understanding that there are more ideas in the background.
And ultimately, I think when you look at a lot of modern quilts and people talk about being inspired by the Bauhaus, for us, we look to make quilts that are contemporary, that reflect our lives and aren't just nostalgic looking back. And I think there's a kind of an irony to me, actually, of the people who are kind of quote unquote discovering the Bauhaus and seeing like this is this radical departure, because at this point it's kind of nostalgic.
It's 100 years old.
It's a century old.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is, what that shows you though, is it's a powerful influence. It's part of our vocabulary. It's what we've grown up with. And it's just as valid as anything else. It's a great history. I kind of laugh because my graduate school here in the US actually was founded when the Germans who were running the Bauhaus were fleeing Germany with the Nazis, and they set up what was called the new Bauhaus in the US. So I definitely have this partly in my educational DNA, but I see it as a historic influence and not an end result of where design should be.
Well, and this is such an interesting thing, because one of the questions that we had with the International Quilt Museum show was that there are a lot of people who assume that we're inspired by traditional quilts, and I'm inspired by, if the part of history that I'm inspired by was that kind of Bauhaus, modernism, that part of history, not as much the 19th century nostalgia. And when I made my first modern quilt in 1987, there was no connection for me with like Sunbonnet Sue, and the culture at that time was 100% quilts are about country and nostalgia. And I remember somebody saying to me that she said she was sending her quilt out to be hand quilted because it deserved to be hand quilted. So the suggestion, which implies that hand stitching is always better than machine stitching. And so I think if you're popping into the quilting world in 2021, you might not realize how different it was when we started in 1999.
And decades before.
Well, but that the idea of modernity in quilts it was just like the whole goal was to find fabrics that looked like they would have been available in the 19th century, early 20th century, or that people who had fabric lines just recolored traditional fabric prints and that kind of thing. So anyway, we have to get on to other questions, but such a
it's a broad and interesting topic, and I think ultimately Bauhaus is just it
was a stepping stone for me, for sure.
It's a huge influence, as is, to me, every single movement in the arts and culture influences where we are today.
But for me, the ideas behind it, which is this blend of what individuals and hands can do when you have access to machinery that helps you make something that you couldn't have made with your hands alone. And that, to me, was what was exciting, so that I don't have to apologize for having a machine-stitched binding, for example.
So I'll give a really quick example.
And then we gotta go.
So I remember being in a lecture once where someone showed a slide of a Le Corbusier, really modern-looking chrome recliner, and they were talking about how this kind of Bauhaus influence made everything so industrial and got away from the handmade. And I was like, excuse me, take a look at that. Like, if you look at it, there are over 500 pieces, bolts, screws. The whole thing is hand assembled. Yes, it's made out of chrome pipe, but the machinery allows it to be made, but there's still a maker who is making this. It's not coming off an assembly line. And so I think often people blur industry with, it gets messed up in my mind.
Yeah.
So anyway,
But anyway,
this would become a whole semester of art history.
But I think what's interesting about the Modern Meets Modern exhibit also is that for those of you who haven't seen, they're going to have a challenge that they have some modern vintage, some quilts that were modern vintage at the time, that they're going to ask people to respond to those quilts, not copy it, but to look at the aspects of those quilts and to make some mini quilts that will be part of a challenge. And
so definitely go to the International Quilt Museum site. They've got really nice photography, and you can view the documentation, the original collections, and as Week said, take a look at the challenge. If some people love challenges because it spurs them to create something they wouldn't make otherwise. And
but it's a purchase prize, so it would
money.
And that they would buy the piece, and I'm one of the judges for that challenge. So okay, so I want to get on to some other questions. It looks like some of you are still having some interruptions in your Wi-Fi and others of you aren't. So if you are having difficulty, feel free to watch it later or watch it on our YouTube channel.
Yes.
But we know it's not
on our end.
Our end because there are certainly in New Mexico and in various places people aren't having problems. So we know it's not on our end. So we also wanted to talk about, where's our, behind you.
Oh, I'm sitting on it.
Our Warp and Weft holiday, because this line was released in like May. We never have control over when these things are released. But I was worried about trying to promote Christmas in like April or May, because it seems early for many people. But this is...
Go
ahead.
I thought you were stopping. It's our third release in our Warp and Weft premium yarn dye line, and it is a collection of really nice plaids, stripes, mini ginghams, buffalo checks that are appropriate for the holidays. We've got kind of the blues that can be used for the Jewish holidays or for winter. We've got greens and reds and aquas. But the idea is combined, they can be wonderful at the holidays, but individually, they're just useful fabrics any time of year. If you need a really great red, I mean, that is just as much a picnic summer as it is Christmas if it's combined with these plaids or checks. So it is versatile and nice.
And I really want to do... I say this every year, but maybe this is the year, now that we have these. I want to do family pajamas this year.
Oh.
I think that would be super fun for...
winter pajamas.
Yes, Christmas. But the thing is, like if you have these, like you see this plaid.
I love that plaid.
This plaid, for winter, but you can wear it in January and it doesn't feel like you're still wearing your Christmas decorations or whatever. So one of the comments that I loved when we showed this quilt, which is our cool Yule quilt, which I'll show you, it was somebody said, I love that you're reinterpreting and broadening the idea of Christmas colors, that it doesn't just have to be red and green. And that was definitely our goal, especially with this tealish aqua. You can see...
It's a grid of 9.
Oh, wait. Let's see if we can get behind it. Hold on.
We can at least, see 2.
Okay.
And someone commented on the quilt behind us, which is our picnic quilt.
Yeah, so you can see most of it here. But
you're a little high there for me.
so you can see it's pieced and it's a very fast. Hold on. It's a very fast block, but you can see it. It's a digital download on our website, and we don't have kits of it yet, but we're working on that. But there's definitely yardage available.
So if you're interested in a kit, hang on, because they will be up soon, and the pattern will be, you can buy the pattern individually as a digital download, but it will be included as a printout in the kits. And I know we had a couple questions from our Australian friends. There's a challenge right now with the Australian Post is basically blocking most international.
So as I understand it, there seems to be, the Australians seem to be being told one thing, and we're being told
something else.
We're being told that the U.S. Postal Service has transportation problems in Australia, and so the U.S. postal system has halted all first class and priority mail to Australia. So
temporarily,
we can't ship things, but unfortunately, just the way that our technology works, even downloadable patterns, we can't send either. So we're sorry we can't. That's technology that is beyond the scope of our little website, but
so we're hanging in there because we know that it's a temporary thing with labor shortages due to COVID, and we're all trying to get through this.
It's a transportation thing, they said. I'm not sure
and
why that is.
I think we've all read different things, but the reality is, for right now, we are unable to ship to Australia. Basically, everyone here is unable.
Or do downloads
or
too.
do commerce with Australia.
Yeah.
So.
So another question we had.
Mary, sorry. I'm sorry, Mary. I just saw your comment. Oh, you make such great neckties, Mary. So,
So we have to tell. So Mary just commented, PJs sound good, but how about neckties? So we just have to tell this hysterical story. So Mary belongs, or we belong to Mary's church, and go there pre-COVID when we could all gather. And at the giving of the peace at one point, I said, peace be with you, to Mary's husband, who is a former Episcopal priest. And he was wearing a necktie made out of one of our fabrics. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's our fabric.
Made impeccably by Mary.
Very
whose
impeccably.
Craftsmanship is insanely
So
good.
it was hilarious. What are the odds of shaking hands with somebody and they're wearing a necktie made with your fabric? So
and Mary, the reason I'm also laughing is, due to COVID, we haven't had trade shows
church.
For years, every time we had a new fabric release, I would make bow ties, a series of bow ties from the new fabric. So I would wear them for presentations. I haven't worn a tie in a couple of years now. Not only that, but I haven't made any ties from our last 2 or 3 fabric lines.
I think there's one that's very Christmassy. This one, I think that would be a fantastic Christmas tie.
I love bow ties are really quick. I had it down that I had a pattern and I could make a bow tie in under 45 minutes.
Okay.
So anyway.
Let's keep going though. Okay, so we also had a question. So let's finish with the yarn dyes.
Cool Yule.
So Cool Yule, and then somebody was asking about liking the warp and weft fabrics, but being uncertain how to use them in patterns. And she asked, can you just substitute them with solids? And this is how, I wanted to show this example. This is our House of Mirrors quilt that was made with the warp and weft yarn dyes and solids. And if you can see, even though it looks from probably on your screen that those are solid fabrics, those are actually yarn dyes. But the thing that you'll notice with most yarn dyes, I don't know if we have warp and weft.
No, I don't think you brought it.
Didn't bring that here. Is that they have direction often, and that isn't a big deal if they're smaller scale yarn dyes. It's a larger deal when they are larger scale yarn dyes, because once you start cutting these up smaller, they become, you get big areas of red and big areas of white that you wouldn't want to have blur into a solid. But if you look at the quilt behind us, go ahead.
I was looking right behind Weeks, this very large triangle. This is our picnic quilt, which is a download on our patterns page. If you look here, you get the directionality of the plaid here that is, of course, turned 60 degrees here. So you very distinctly see the different pieces. Even on a small screen, you'll see that. If you had a solid, it would read as one piece. If you had a really small tone-on-tone print, it would still probably read as one piece. So you have to decide when you're using a directional fabric, whether it's a print or a woven, whether you like or dislike. It's not inherently good or bad. In this case, we were just embracing that you would see the structure of the piecing and said, like, bring it on. You'll see it. That's fine. In general, my feeling is smaller scale prints and yarn dyes substitute pretty well. I think whenever you're mixing styles of fabric, whether it's batiks, small scale, large scale prints, yarn dyes, one of the keys is that everyone needs a friend. If you have a quilt that has 20 fabrics and only one is a woven, it will probably stand out because it will set its, our brains and our eyes notice things that are different. But if it was one of 4 or one of 5, it would probably be really harmonious.
So I was going to use our On the Dot quilt. Is on the cover of Dot Crazy.
And I'm going to zoom in just to get a little closer so you can see.
So this is the perfect example of, to me, when you're looking at a pattern, you're looking, for example, in this case, you're looking at 2 different roles for fabric. One in this quilt that's occupied by the dots and one that's occupied by the white. You can't interchange them or you'll lose the pattern, because it's the contrast between those 2 types of fabric that give you the contrast that creates the pattern. So to me, like, these are the big categories. There's solids, and then there's batiks and tone-on-tones and small scale prints and yarn dyes. And then there's large scale prints, large scale yarn dyes, directional fabrics, and that kind of thing. And within that group, you can mix and match, but you can't take one of these dotted prints and put a solid in there and not have it be visually jarring.
Or if you took one of those dots and replaced it with a novelty print that had a frog on it, like a big frog, you would see the frog. With this, you see more color and pattern. And I think the role of the fabric is it representing color first and foremost, or is it representing some very discernible pattern?
So I think the question of, can you substitute geometric fabrics for yarn dyes? The question is the scale similar? Because it's not about whether it's a yarn dye or not, it's about whether the pattern piece is a similar scale to the fabric. So
yeah, it's about the roll.
Yeah, so if you, let's say somebody's made a log cabin and they're 1-inch strips, it's a small scale one, small scale log cabin or something, it's not going to work with a big chunky plaid like that. But it would work with a smaller scale one.
It would work beautifully with a mini gingham.
Exactly.
So it's not, is it a yarn dye? It's more, what is the scale of the yarn dye?
Well,
this works like a tone on tone, whereas this works more like a large scale print.
So the question about the geometric fabrics is, what is the scale of the geometric pattern fabrics in relation to the scale of the pieces?
Yeah.
So that's, I think people
scale is
scale and contrast. Scale and contrast. That is everything. And whether it's a small scale like feed sack print, or whether it's a mini gingham, or whether it's like, a tulip pink small scale print, it doesn't matter. But it does matter if you've got her big, big squirrel or owl or something like that. That's going to be a totally different role. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work in this quilt, because you don't want to be, there's no point in cutting up the owl. So I hope that answers the question about the geometric fabrics and how to use them, and the other question about substituting, what kind of fabrics you can substitute for yarn dyes. Somebody else was asking about, should you wash dry yarn dyes before using? Okay, so Kathy, clearly you have not heard our
rant.
Our rant on pre-washing. Why would you not? Why would you not pre-wash anything? I know you're gonna have to iron, but there's a YouTube tutorial on a 2-part YouTube tutorial. That's how thorough we are.
On our Modern Quilt Studio channel.
Yes, about how to pre-wash and why to pre-wash. But pre-wash everything all the time.
That's our approach. There is an added benefit to pre-washing yarn dyes, and that is that yarn dyes are loomed differently. The prints that you have in your stash in general are on a very tightly woven cotton that allows for detail in the printing process. The pattern you see in a yarn dye just comes from alternating threads in the warp and the weft. They aren't as densely woven. Even our nice premium yarn dyes are more densely woven than most on the market, and they're really nice hand. But the very nature of them means that they're a bit different. And one of the things we love about the mill that we get these from is they're just great quality. They don't fray much at all, but any yarn dye is inherently going to fray a little more than a print. And the physical action of washing and drying gets the fibers to bond a little.
To shrink.
They both, they do two things. They shrink and they bond, just kind of the fuzziness of them. And they become a little more stable to work with. I know that everyone's water chemistry is different, but when we got our yarn dyes, all 3 collections that we've done, the first thing we did is wash a yard of every one of them together with a Shout color catcher, and we had 0 bleeding. I mean, we just had fantastic color fastness with these. So for these fabrics, we're not washing them because we're afraid of bleeding, although honestly, I would do that nonetheless, just because every now and then you might have a fabric that bleeds, and you'd rather catch that before you put all your work into a quilt.
So I'm going to answer Kimberly Voss's question, even though we go into more detail on this in our YouTube, but because I feel like I'm asked this question weekly, and so I'll just keep answering it. Why would you pre-wash fabric even if the quilt is only going to hang on the wall?
No,
if so,
would
why?
you? Yeah.
Or would you? Okay, so here are some real life scenarios that we have dealt with. We know people who have had wall quilts that they took down to when they were repainting their house, and they put them in their basement while they were repainting their house, and there was a sewage backup, and they suddenly had to wash the quilt. And if you haven't already pre-washed, you don't know how the dyes are going to behave. And even things like Kona solids. Kona's solids are made in, last time I heard, there were 7 different countries. So that's 7 different types of cotton that are going to shrink at different rates.
Different chemicals.
different lines of fabric, different chemicals, all of that. Other scenarios that we've gotten calls about were people who have inherited quilts, who are know that their mother, their grandmother, or whatever, used to dry clean her quilts or take them someplace, and they're musty and they're dusty, and these people are feeling very anxious because they have quilts that they know need to be washed, but they're afraid to ruin this heirloom that has a lot of sentimental value. Other people, we've had seen quilt disasters where somebody has used they've planned something to be a big wall hanging, and they've used a water-soluble marker for the quilting, and then in the process of spraying the water-soluble marker, the water has wicked from the white fabric to the red fabric, and then there's suddenly this big pink bleed. We've had people say, well, it's only red. It's not only red. We have blue, purple, there's green. We've had lots of different ones.
So she's trying to scare you. And
no, I'm not trying to scare you.
No, I say that.
Don't say that.
I say that because I actually would be worried. I feel like.
Let me just. I am definitively not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you make good choices that won't lead to heartbreak for you or for somebody else. And for people who say, I'm never going to wash my quilt, I promise you that within the next 50 years, whoever is on the receiving end of your quilts while you're gone will want to be able to wash your quilt. And will not know what to do if they can't.
I can't count the number of times over the years where we have been commissioned to do quilts that will hang on a wall either in a company boardroom or in a public space or in a private collection, and we'll get a call. We always tell the customer that we pre-wash, we give them washing instructions. They invariably forget, and we sometimes get a call 2 years later from a client saying, we love your quilt, but we realized it needs to be cleaned, but we feel like we could never wash it. What should we do? And we say, well, as a reminder, it's already been washed.
Yeah.
We send it that way. The quilt behind us right now, I don't know how many times we've washed this. Things get dusty.
Well, the Dominican quilts.
Oh, even at my own university.
They have some of our quilts, and Bill just brought them home and washed them again because wall quilts get dusty.
Yeah, like part of what we like about quilts is their tactile nature, their softness. They absorb sound, they soften up a room, but they will get dusty no matter how clean your room is. It's going to get dusty. So if you start with pre-washing the fabrics and you wash your quilt when you finish it, it takes the burden off of whoever enjoys it later. I really like being able to pass on a quilt to someone who's commissioned it or as a gift, telling people how to care for it, saying, no, don't take it to dry cleaner. That's actually, dry cleaning is pretty rough on textiles in general, but you can just toss in the cold water wash. And we have specific directions, but that's our approach.
See, she's not scared. She appreciates the nice
Good.
knowledge. That's the goal. Nobody's trying to scare you.
Oh, I think being a little scared is okay. Just
informed.
Put it informed.
I want you to be
I like
informed.
that. That's better.
Yes.
Because I get that people are. We've got a lot to do. There are people who don't want to take the time.
And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But we have probably answered 30 phone calls of very upset, anxious people who have had quilts bleed and ruined. And there are a gazillion YouTube tutorials and hacks of how you deal with quilt bleeding and people using bleach pens, and and if I just am like, why would you even take that chance? I mean, because it's not like it's not like it's an expensive process to pre-wash fabric.
It's totally a different situation if you've inherited an antique quilt and you don't know its condition. But if you are the one making it,
right.
then from the get-go, do what you can to avoid that becoming an issue in the future.
Basically, plan for it to be cleaned, one
Yeah.
way or another.
That's
So, Mary Pat, thank you for raising funds for the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. You know, I think like all of us, we have watched a lot of, throughout our lifetimes as children of the 60s, inequity and certainly I have felt helpless to know how to do that. And we were thrilled that it went for $1,300, and even though that's a small amount of money for a college scholarship, it's something.
It's something
to somebody. But the really great thing that was just so wonderful was that when I talked to the person at the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, I asked them about how to transfer, how they wanted us to transfer the money and to make sure that it was received and everything. And they said that they had been overwhelmed since the murder of George Floyd. They had been overwhelmed with donations in an epic way, and
Great.
there are a lot of people who are realizing that certainly scholarships for the HBCUs and are in a really, really tangible way that we can all bring about equity.
And plus, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, what we both like about it is they are really reliable. They know what they're doing. They know
They're
how
a charity navigator.
charity navigator.
Yeah.
Yeah, they keep their costs down. So, Monica, you're asking how we deal with raveling when we pre-wash. So, first of all, it depends on your washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
We currently do all of our washing in a front-loading machine, which tends to have less raveling. Anytime we're pre-washing small cut pieces, we put them in a delicates bag that's zippered.
Like charm squares. Something like that.
And yes, we actually, if we do have charm squares, we do pre-wash them, and people think that's nuts, but we pre-wash everything. We don't have a ton of raveling. There is some, but I think if you have a top-loading machine that has an agitator, those tend to be a little rougher,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly I would say use the most delicate setting your machine has.
And maybe use a lingerie bag
Yeah.
for your fabrics. I mean, if you have 6 yards of fabric or something like that, obviously that might not be possible. But there's a couple of tricks. One, if you are washing backing for a quilt and you have a piece that's 5.5 yards or 6 yards or 8 yards, or depending on if it's a really big bed size quilt or something, and you know that you're going to have to cut it in half to piece it anyway. Cut it in half before you pre-wash it. And yes, you're going to lose a half an inch more by cutting it, but the twisting and the roping is part of what causes wrinkling and pulling and stretching and warping and everything. And the physics that I've seen over the years are that things that are square ravel less and rope less and twist less than things that are long and skinny. So if you have a 42 by 8 yard piece of fabric, you're going to end up with a lot of twisting and then more raveling. If you have a fat quarter, you're not going to have that much raveling. So because it's more square, being like 18 by 21 or whatever. So the less long and narrow you can get it, the less raveling you're going to have.
And you can buy a pinking blade for a rotary cutter, and some people, if they're just cutting yardage to pre-wash, or let's say you've bought a yard at a quilt shop, some people will just pink the edge before putting it in the wash. We have those blades. We don't actually do
Never
that.
used it once.
Well, I've used it
for
many times.
pre-washing. I've never used it for pre-washing.
I don't think they cut that well.
Yeah.
And they're really expensive. If it works for you, do it. The raveling just doesn't bother me that much. And I think our machine, we absolutely get raveling every time we wash anything. But I just kind of pull it out and trim it off and don't worry too much.
I think part of it is that it's a mindset too, because I think that there are a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, it raveled. Yeah. Well, it's fabric. It's
fabric
not paper.
Ravels.
It's not paper. It's fabric, and fabric ravels when it's cut, and you trim it off and you move on, and it's just not, I don't see it as a problem, but I can tell it really freaks people out sometimes. So
yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mind game. Yeah. And so if
just trim it off.
If you can get yourself to be okay with the fact that fabric ravels, I think.
But we don't have things knot up,
no,
and
we don't. And I think that again, we happen to have a machine that's fairly delicate and has a kind of 15-minute fast cycle. It's the thing I like about front loaders are more gentle. There's a lot that I don't like about front loaders.
Yeah, loaders, yeah.
I have yet to meet the perfect washing machine. People have their opinions on them, but
I like the ones we have here. So we have here, because this is a rental unit and you can't rely on people to leave the door open and all that business with front loaders. We have an HE top loader machine here that does not have an agitator in it. So you get the water efficiency and energy efficiency of a front loader without all of the kind of mold and gasket issues that we have with our front loaders. So anyway, okay. Any other questions you all have? We're also going to talk, let's see, about, there was other questions about in the stash. Oh, no, I guess. I'm trying to figure out where it went. Oh, I guess there was the question about when we were talking about modern quilting and everything, about the idea of some quilts, like this is our Making Waves quilt, that was definitively not inspired by 19th century patterns, and a lot of our quilts, like our swatch quilt. This was definitely not a quilt that would have been possible in the late 19th century, and it was not meant to look nostalgic.
And by not possible, that's because you didn't have the range of fabrics commercially available.
Yeah.
The reality is we're not using fancy machines or sewing machines that we're quilting with. We're mostly sewing straight lines.
Yeah.
So a lot of the craft of our quilting is the craft that we would have used 100 years ago, but the forms and the thoughts are different. So the fact that we have such different fabrics available to us today allows us to design a different kind of quilt.
Yeah. So anyway, but now I'm jumping back to the pre-washing. There are lots of people who have told us that they don't want to pre-wash because they don't want to iron. And again, I want to be clear before we sign off that it's your quilt, it's your fabric, you do whatever you want. We're sharing, our goal is to always to share our expertise to help you understand the choices you have and the because we interact with thousands and thousands of people, we hear a lot more than the average quilter would hear about, and because people call us when there's a panic, we have just learned a lot through experience that we're sharing with you and you decide whether you want to There are no rules. You don't want to pre-wash, don't pre-wash. But we have just heard so many sad stories of people who regret not pre-washing that we want to encourage people to pre-wash.
Yeah.
So anyway, any other questions before we say goodbye? Hi from Ohio.
Hello, Polly.
Just down the way. We are still working on our next publication, and we have 2 fabric lines that are in production.
There's a lot
right
going
now. And we're going to be, we'll be back on November 1st with.
But I will get kits of the cool Yule.
Yes, we hope. And I love the backing plaid too.
It's a really happy one.
Oh, Modern Meets Modern Challenge comments. Can you be more specific, Tracy, about you want to know? Go to the International Quilt Museum website and look for the Modern Meets Modern Challenge.
And it'll be, I mean, it's the current exhibit there right now.
Yeah,
it opened last week.
If you look, scroll through our Facebook feed, you'll see we posted the challenge and a link to it on the website if you have any difficulty finding that. Oh, Stacey just got here. Yes, you can watch the replay later. You can watch it on Facebook or you can watch it on our YouTube channel. And I'm so glad you loved your new books from the Wisconsin Quilt Show.
And thank you, Stacy, and everyone else who was so patient. We were inundated with orders from Wisconsin, and it took us longer than usual, but we got through them all. And
it was like Lucy and Ethel at the chocolate factory. There was just these stacks, and I was like, "There's more coming in." I was up till like 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, filling orders.
We are so lucky that we have the world's greatest mail carrier, Calvin. And like, how many of you actually not only have your mail carrier's number, but text them multiple times a week
without having to identify yourself?
Hey,
Calvin, we've got 50 packages.
It's really busy, and like, I'll just get a text from Calvin like, I'm driving by. Do you have anything else you want me to pick up?
And Calvin's like, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. I'm like, no.
So people complain about the U.S. Post Office, including me, but we just happen. Both of the studios we have had the world's greatest mail carriers.
And during that
it matters.
We had 4 months of orders in like 5 days. And Calvin was picking up 40 to 50 packages, sometimes twice a day. Like 30 packages in the morning. It's like as fast as I could get them out. He was so dedicated to getting the mail to you as quickly as possible. But I will tell you a couple things. If you are in Canada, please, please, please be patient. It just takes longer. I know it's more expensive. We don't set the postal rates. I know it takes longer. If you email us, we can't track it. Typically, especially if it was a calendar that was sent first class mail or media mail, we can't always track it once it gets over the border. But we have not had, in the like 22 years that we've been shipping, I can count on one hand with some extra fingers the number of packages that have actually gotten lost.
It's exceptionally
Everything gets
rare.
there, but there's nothing, once it leaves our hands, there's nothing I can do to expedite it for you. That's just,
But it usually ends up where it needs to be.
Yeah. And this is...
Yeah, we just want to be clear and positive. There are problems everywhere right now, and most people are doing their best, and we are doing what we can to get you what you need.
I will say, though, that I shared yesterday on our Facebook page that please read the notice that came out from the U.S. Postal Service about holiday deliveries, that they are going to be more expensive and slower, but that the U.S. Postal Service has made decisions that will slow all of the mail permanently. And this is a new postmaster who has made these decisions, and that is going to affect us, and it's going to affect you too, and all of the shopping, internet shopping you do that's not, by Amazon. It has its own fleet of vehicles and doesn't need the U.S. Postal Service, but be sure to speak up to your representatives in Washington if you are not happy about the fact that your mail is going to be permanently slow. So,
and Monica, you were asking about, do we do this on the 1st, even if it's on the Sunday? Yeah, we tried to stick reliably to the 1st. We had the little, we weren't able to do it because we had jackhammers working on the roads outside of our studio. So we had that little hiatus, but yes, we keep to the 1st. And
there was even one first when we had jackhammers in Oak Park and jackhammers in Michigan. That was unfortunate.
Really rough. So in general, things are good. And
I'm glad Susan's order came in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
We really try.
It's literally out of our hands. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
And
you can
Monica,
watch the past ones on YouTube.
Yes, if you can't attend live, the Facebook recordings are auto-generated and go up. So they reside on Facebook with our other live videos. A couple days after we're done, as soon as there's a break, I also process a slightly better recording to put on our YouTube channel, because Facebook records at a little lower resolution. But the ones that go on our YouTube channel take a little hand holding. So that I do my best to get those up in a timely fashion.
But if you know you're not going to be able to be here and you want to leave questions, we always post the day before to remind people that we're going to be doing a Quilts First and to take questions. So a lot of the topics that we covered today were questions that people left either on our Instagram feed or on our QuickBook platform. Facebook page. Facebook or Instagram. So feel free to leave questions if you want us to cover something and you're not going to be available for whatever reason.
And thanks for being here. So nice seeing you all, and have a safe month. See you in a month.
Yes, take care of yourself and show us what you're making, and join us if you want to join the Modern Quilt Studio Fabrics and Patterns page. You can share what you've been making of patterns and fabrics of ours, and we'd love to see it.
And thanks again, Karen, for liking the picnic quilt. This is
yes.
I like this.
It's one of our favorites.
It's fun. It's a fun one to make too.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care. Enjoy your afternoon.
Bye-bye.